Very good book so far. Now, I've read the audiobook, but there's nothing like reading it, in person here. So this has been really fun to read this book. I highly recommend it. The Wuhan Cover Up and the Terrifying Bioweapons Arm Race by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This is an amazing book. And like I said, just started it physically, started reading it. And I found something pretty interesting that I wanted to read right before chapter 2. So it is about page 13. I'm going to start here. And this is called Part 1, The Road to Wuhan. So I'm just going to read what it says here in this area. Okay, the day and year, month, day, and event. 1914. European militaries explore germ warfare in World War One. Sorry. 1925, Geneva Protocol establishes no first use of chemical and biological warfare. 1932, Shiro Ishii opens lab in Harbin, China as ground zero of bioweapons research. 1933, Germans test bioweapon feasibility in Paris Metro and London's Piccadilly Circus. 1936, Shiro Ishii forms Japan's notorious Unit 731. 1937, Japan uses biological weapons against China. 1940, in October, Unit 731 tests plague-infected fleas on occupied Chinese cities and towns. 1940, Fort Detrick breeds superbugs to spread pathogens. 1941, the WBC committee convenes to determine feasibility of bioweapons. 1942, February 17th, WBC committee endorses biowarfare as a promising new line of weaponry. 1942, mustard gas experiments begin on U.S. servicemen. 1943, in March, U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories set up at Camp Detrick. 1943, FDR pledges no first use of biowarfare and chemical weapons. 1945, September, first U.S. officials go to Japan to gather data from Unit 731. 1945, Operation Paperclip begins importing Nazi scientists. 1946, January. Ishii is detained by U.S. agents who retrieve hidden data and specimens. 1947, CIA takes control of Operation Paperclip. 1947, Edgewood Arsenal begins human experiments with tabun gas. 1949, August 29, Russia detonates their first atomic bomb. 1949, August, the CIA conducts biological infection testing through the Pentagon air conditioning system. 1949, December, the U.S. co-ops Japanese war criminals. 1949, December, the U.S. co-ops Japanese war criminals to develop biological weapons. 1950, September 26. Navy begins testing effects on airborne bacteria on civilians. 1950, zinc calcium sulfide gas is released over major U.S. cities throughout the 50s. 1952, October 8th, 669-page UN report accuses U.S. of violating Geneva Protocol by using biological weapons in Korean War. 1952, CIA begins Project MK Naomi to stockpile and test biological and chemical agents. 1953, CIA Mind Control Project MK Ultra begins. 1953, Frank Olson is dosed with LSD by CIA colleagues and dies from a suspicious fall through a hotel window. 1954, Operation Whitecoat begins testing deadly pathogens on Seventh-day Adventists. 1955, CIA releases unknown bacteria over Tampa Bay, Florida. 1959, arsenal of weaponized insects developed. 1960, Pentagon and CIA actively research biological and chemical weapons by the mid 1960s. 1961, January 17th, Eisenhower warns against the rise of the military industrial complex and public policy captured by a scientific technological elite. 1962, U.S. begins defoliants, including Agent Orange in Vietnam. 1962, Cuba charges CIA with instigating Newcastle outbreak. 1964, Army and Navy deploy missiles with biological warheads attached. 1965, CIA sprays bacteria into the air in Washington, D.C. Wow. 1966, June 7th to June 10th, CIA tests bioweapons feasibility in New York City subway system. 1966, CIA begins Project MK Search to find mind-altering drugs that can be used to control human behavior. 1966, U.S. researchers succeed in freeze-drying bioagents. 1966, U.S. smallpox escapes a UK lab infecting residents in Birmingham. 1967, CIA begins Project MK Often Chickwit to test toxicological effects on humans and animals. 1967, Fort Detrick develops delivery of bioagents by Sergeant Missile. 1967, Sergeant of Defense, Secretary of Defense acknowledges U.S. is actively developing biological weapons. 1967, outbreak of Marsburg virus from lab leaks in Germany and Serbia. 1969, President Nixon terminates the American biowarfare program. 1971, U.S. conducts biological attack on Cuba with African swine fever. 1971, smallpox escapes lab near ROC. 1972, U.S. destroys stockpiles of biological agents and munitions. 1973, CIA destroys records of human experimentation. 1975, January 22nd, U.S. ratifies the Geneva Protocol. 1975, U.S. signs Biological Weapons Convention Treaty. 1977, in March, Senate hearing confirm historical field experiments on 239 populated areas. 1977, H1N1 Spanish flu escapes from a lab, causing an outbreak in China. 1979, laboratory accident in Swervlok, USSR triggers outbreak of anthrax. 1985, U.S. sends weapons-specific biological agents to Saddam Hussein. 1987, DoD operating 127 bioweapon research projects. 1988, November 23, Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act signed into law. 1990, May 22nd, U.S. signs the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989 into law. 1991, bioweapons blowback on U.S. forces in Desert Storm, forcing the use of a dangerous anthrax vaccine that likely contributes greatly to the mysterious Gulf War illness suffered by returning veterans. Again, that's all page 13, 14, and 15 of my new favorite book here, The Wuhan Cover-Up. It's pretty much a sequel, or it feels like a sequel to the book we all know, The Real Anthony Fauci. So if you like this one, Anthony Fauci book, this one, you're gonna love this next one. Sorry, I am sweating like a pig here. Whew. All right, so that is a great book. Make sure that you get that, pick that up, get the hardcover. I don't even know if there is a soft cover or not. It's about 400 pages, about 300 pages. I mean, there's literally like 100 and some odd pages of just sources. That's awesome. I mean, these sources began around page 450 and go to like 530. So a lot of great sources in there. If you're looking for some good summer reading, here it is right here. All right. And another good one right here, Crippled America by Donald J. Trump. So I hope everybody will take the time to look at those, look into those. Let's get into the first video that I want to play. Well, I turn my fan on because I'm really just sweating here. We are going to look at one of the most recent videos from Rand Paul. Rand Paul reacts to Fauci testimony. This is with The Hill. So if this gets knocked down, this is The Hill's fault, not mine. It's their video.
Dr. Anthony Fauci was grilled by Republican lawmakers yesterday as he testified before the House's Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Republicans questioned Fauci over a variety of topics, including the basis for his public health recommendations and emails. Fauci defended himself and he claims that he orchestrated a cover-up of COVID origins. Democrats largely praised Fauci throughout the hearing. Here's a glimpse of some of the chaos that ensued.
You said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no answer.
Yes, it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we'll take that as a you don't know what you represent.
Joining us now to discuss is Republican Senator Rand Paul. Welcome back to the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So you have previously accused Dr. Fauci of potentially misleading Congress when he denied that gain-of-function research was funded in Wuhan by the U.S. government. We've had a lot of updates since then, particularly with this top deputy of his admitting to stonewalling the FOIA process, to changing characters in words so it'd be harder for journalists and independent news organizations to get that information. What do you make of what took place yesterday and Fauci's continued defense of some of those actions?
I think one of the most surprising things was how quickly he threw his aide under the bus. David Morenz has worked for 20 years for Anthony Fauci. And in his opening statement, he says, barely knew the guy. He had an office in another building. Hardly ever saw him, wasn't included in my policy meetings. And so essentially they've thrown David Morenz to the wolves now, but David Morenz has admitted that he destroyed evidence, that he deleted emails, that he used his government phone. He also offered up that he was a personal courier and that he could take personal messages to Anthony Fauci's house. He also said that Tony, he thinks, has cleaned up his email by deleting things. And he tells Peter Daszak from EcoHealth in his emails, I think we're safe now. I've deleted all those emails. I think we're safe now. If that doesn't warrant further scrutiny or prosecution, I don't know what does. But his testimony directly conflicts with what Anthony Fauci said yesterday, who said he never used private email, never used a private phone. And so really, I think there needs to be further investigation to find out who's telling the truth here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask exactly about that. What sort of follow-up do you hope to see, or what's already in progress following these new revelations? Is there a possibility of more forensic examination of the technology to get emails or other kind of information that might have been deleted? And what do you hope to see in terms of accountability coming from all of this?
My suggestion to the House COVID committee has been that they should ask Dr. Morenz if he'd like to complete his testimony now that he's heard Anthony Fauci's testimony. Because Anthony Fauci essentially has called David Morenz a liar. David Morenz's emails have implicated him as breaking federal law by destroying evidence. And so I think there is a real question. Does now Dr. David Morenz wish to correct the record? Does he wish to discuss more completely what was going on with Anthony Fauci? Because Anthony Fauci basically disowned him yesterday. And I think if there were a prosecution, this is a kind of pivotal point at which a prosecutor with certain probably negotiations with Morenz could get him to give a more complete picture of what was going on. We know that there was a back channel. There was a scientist at Boston University they were using as a back channel. In one of the emails, David Morenz and Peter Daszak are communicating, and David says, Tony wants me to use the back channel. Tony doesn't want us to talk directly anymore. We need to use the back channel, which is a scientist at Boston University. So when Fauci was asked about this, he says he never heard of a back channel. But I think they let him get off too easily because Morenz is saying there was a back channel. And this all is done to evade scrutiny. But the intriguing thing is when you get back to the issue at hand, was dangerous research going on in China? Was it gain of function? And why were we funding it? Anthony Fauci still says it wasn't gain of function. He says the regulatory definition, it never met the regulatory definition of the safety committee. The safety committee was called the P3CO committee. The problem with that line of argument is that Anthony Fauci never submitted the Wuhan research to the safety committee. So he can say we're using that definition, but the committee never considered it. There was never any consideration by the safety committee of whether this was gain of function. Now, I've asked the NIH, was there internal deliberation? Did you guys have a discussion? Did you have scientists presenting the evidence for why this was not gain of function? I'm assuming that happened, but the NIH will not reveal that to me. I've asked for 3 years for it. Last year, almost a year ago, I had the Democrat chairman sign a letter with me. We still don't have that information. In fact, it is my conclusion that the NIH is actually more secretive than the CIA. And that's alarming and disturbing and really should not be tolerated.
That's incredible. You know, I was a little surprised by the level of defense of Fauci I heard from some Democrats at the committee hearing yesterday, because the Democrats, many representatives were very critical of the things that Morin said, critical of him. The Biden Health Department has taken action now against Eco Health Alliance. Its own Energy Department thinks that the lab leak was more likely. The New York Times now had a great opinion piece on why the lab leak is more likely. There's my point being that there's tremendous bipartisan, cross-ideological. It's not, it's nothing at stake for the parties, really, in terms of this question of whether that improper research was done and that was the origins of COVID. And I'm glad to see, Democrats working with you, for instance, to get more information. But then at this committee hearing, it did suddenly feel partisan again. Do you know why? Do you have thoughts about why that might be the case with Fauci particularly?
I can only surmise that there is such a love for central authority and such a love for government being in charge of healthcare that they see Anthony Fauci as representing central authority, the authority on healthcare, that they see it as an attack on government. Whereas I see it as an attack on his judgment. Basically, he said in 2012 that, yes, a pandemic could occur from a lab leak. If it did, though, that the knowledge gained would be worth the risk. And really, that judgment call, I think, is a horrible judgment call, and is a call that basically we now have a pandemic where maybe 15 million people died worldwide or more. And the conclusion from, I would say, their families and people who are concerned might be that, the knowledge wasn't worth the risk. In fact, there's a whole group of scientists that have been debating this for over a decade, well before COVID. And many of them say that this type of research has not produced a vaccine, has not produced useful information, but that the risk greatly outweighs the knowledge that comes from this. And that really we should treat this the same way we treat nuclear weapons. At one point they agreed no longer to have explosions of nuclear weapons testing in the air and then underground and all these things. We have nuclear arms treaties. We need to be treating this as something equivalent to nuclear weapons, in the sense that there needs to be negotiations between countries. There needs to be the civilized countries coming together and signing bans on this type of research. This is like, should we develop neurologic weapons? Should we develop biological weapons? There is such a treaty, but it's kind of gone into disfavor over the last several years. And I'm trying to resurrect this, not only domestically. I have a bill that will have more controls on taxpayer-funded gain-of-function research. But also, once we pass that, which I hope we will this year, my hope is to go beyond that and to begin having more meetings among the international civilized countries to try to have voluntary bans from countries on doing this dangerous research.
Yeah, or if the research has to be done, at the very least, it needs to be done in circumstances where the lab safety is up to caliber. And so many of those emails that we've now seen where our scientists admit to misleading the regulators about how much safety would be employed in China. If this research needs to be done, can it be done in the Arctic, on the moon? So, you talk about the bans and doing nuclear testing underground and things like that. If they can make the case for the importance of it, well, under the strictest safety standards, okay, fine. But the people involved in funding this clearly didn't care and were resistant to letting the public and the regulators know about what the safety standards would be.
One of the emails we got through federal court order says that if they find out they're doing this in China in a BSL-2, which is a lower category of safety than is required, people will freak out. That's the words from some of the researchers going back and forth between North Carolina, China, and Peter Daszak, who is the bag man collecting all the taxpayer money for this. He said they'll freak out if they find out this is happening in China. So one of the reasons that some people conclude that this came from a lab or could have is that the safety level was so low. The history of accidents in this lab were significant. We also have evidence that 3 members of that lab became sick in November with a pneumonia of unknown origin, and that in all likelihood, they may have been the 3 first people to be infected by COVID-19, and that they actually worked in this gain of function lab. And to put this in perspective so people can think about what we're talking about, think about the advisability of taking Ebola. Ebola is 50% lethal, and it's typically transferred by bodily fluids, similar to HIV. So it's not transmitted through the air. Would it be a good idea to fund a laboratory experiment where we take Ebola and say, wow, if we can put these 5 or 10 mutations in, let's see if it can be aerosolized and spread through the air? No, that's sort of a death wish for the world, to try to take a deadly disease that is transmissible, but we know how it's transmissible and we can stop the line of transmission and say, let's spread it through the air, where we have almost nothing really works very well. All the stuff we tried with COVID, really none of it really worked. The virus ended up spreading throughout the entire world. And that's what happens. But it would be sort of a death wish for the world to try to be committing experiments where we try to aerosolize very deadly viruses. And so those kind of things just shouldn't happen. Thoughtful people ought to just say, well, you may be curious if you can do this, but that curiosity is potentially a disaster for mankind.
It infected the whole world. COVID went across, it spread throughout the whole world. This virus spread throughout the whole world. And then what happened? It just kind of stopped, or it just kind of hit everybody and just kind of faded out. Like, when did it really end? When did the COVID pandemic, when did it really end? Was it because of warp speed? If they're saying the vaccines didn't work, then what did work? What helped end the pandemic? Just time? Getting Trump out of office? I mean, I'm sure you have a lot of questions too about that. But when did this pandemic end, and why did it just all of a sudden end? Why did it start is obviously the real question. How did it start? And I think this book does a great job of covering that. And that's what I think. I know I've heard 3 different theories, and I think this is the one that I lean towards here. So Rand Paul, just looking at Mr. Rand Paul, there is another clip, but I did want to just mention, in case people hadn't read this one, I got the audiobook, so this will be the next audiobook that I start here. Right now I'm actually reading a very good audiobook written by RFK Jr. called Family Values. But after I finish that one, this will probably be next on my go-to list. This is Deception: The Great COVID Cover-Up. This was by Rand Paul, written or published October 10th, 2023. Senator Rand Paul was on to Anthony Fauci from the start, wielding previously unimaginable power. Fauci misled the country about the origins of the COVID pandemic and shut down scientific dissent. And now we know that it's come out about the whole 6 feet thing didn't work. There's a lot of great Fauci clips. I just have not had time to pull some of those Fauci clips and just they're out there. It doesn't matter for all of you. I'm sure they're out there. But for me, I like to do it for my research purposes, for the book that I'm writing. For the other book that I kind of put on the back burner that is really done, The Invisible Enemy, COVID-19, talking about the early days. I was trying to document the early days of COVID to keep up, because I knew the story would change. We knew the story would change, and it really did. It really did in a lot of ways. So that'll be another topic for another day. I did a series on this channel. I did a YouTube series called The Invisible Enemy. And I think about 2 or 3 of them YouTube pulled. So we'll see. We'll see if I can go back, and I don't think I can redo those, but I know the ones that they pulled, and I know why. And it was because in the early days, there was that one doctor, I think Dr. Erickson was his name, and he was, talking about to how to beat COVID. What are things to fight against COVID? And it was getting sunlight, playing in the dirt. It was just very natural, basic things. And then he talked about all of the problems with people being locked up in their homes that it could cause. Some of it related to COVID, but a lot of it not. Just the violence problems, the abuse problems, things that just having people locked up, nowhere to go, problems that can cause. So that's the whole reason that I wrote that book, because a lot of that is hard to find, and we need as many books out there on it as possible. So with this book, Kennedy and Trump, there will be some of that in there, and I kind of actually thought about even merging this book and my voter fraud 2020 book, merging them into this one Kennedy and Trump book. And I don't know, we'll see what happens. We'll see where all of that goes. But I think this Rand Paul book is something that we all should read if you can, if you have time, if and when you have time. All right, so that is one video by Rand Paul that I wanted to play. Don't know if I have, I do have just some clips here that I did want to play. There's some good stuff here, getting off of that topic, but also there's so many, I'm just not sure. There's a Dr. Phil one that came out. That one's probably pretty good with Trump's speech. I have not seen that, so that may be good to watch or to play here. But for now, I think what I will do is I want to play some of these short clips. This is a good one. This is If Trump Wins. So RFK Jr., who was on Neil Cavuto, Your World with Cavuto on Fox News, and he was asked about what if Trump wins? That's a pretty interesting question. Let's hear the response, about 3 minutes.
And what you think a return to the White House of Donald Trump would look like.
Well, I don't know. What I would hope would happen is that President Trump would reverse his earlier promises to keep us in war in the Ukraine, to go to war against other countries, to bomb Russia. I hope he doesn't do that. I hope he starts dealing with the debt. He ran up the biggest debt in United States history, $8 trillion in 4 years, more money spent during that 4 years. And every president in our U.S. history combined, from George Washington to George W. Bush, President Biden's done the same thing. President Biden is adding $1 trillion in debt every 90 days.
A lot of that debt for Donald Trump. You're right. A lot of it wasn't asked before COVID, but a good chunk of it with COVID and through that. So that there is a bit of an asterisk.
Yeah, but
right?
And why? Exactly. And why did he shut down the country? Why did he shut down 3.3 million businesses with no scientific citation?
So you got into a debate.
No
if you were lucky
process,
enough
no
to get into a debate with these guys, Robert, for Donald Trump, that's where you would zero in. His handling of COVID and how he handled it.
Yeah, and that would be one of the things. I'd also, I talk about the wars, about the national debt, about the COVID lockdowns, about the chronic disease epidemic, about the vitriol. How are they, either of them, able to end the vitriol between Americans and the hatred, since they both feed on it? They're both products of it. All of these, his promising that he's going to drain the swamp, and appointing an oil lobbyist to run the Department of Interior, pharmaceutical lobbyist to run FDA and HHS, John Bolton to run NSA, Mike Pompeo to run the CIA and the State Department. These swamp creatures who are part of the whole merger, corrupt merger of state and corporate power, who came in and did favors for industry, and that is the swamp. And we need.
I think some of those gentlemen might
disagree
with that characterization, but we don't know. We will see. But Robert, I want to thank you, and I do want to express my sympathies. I know it's been 56 years. I'm sure it's a day you cannot forget. I remember myself. I'm a little younger than you, but that was a dark turn in American history. You and your family got through that, but it cannot be easy, especially this day. Thank you very much.
Oh, Neil, thank you for those thoughts. It means a lot to me. I'm grateful.
All right.
And here's that.
Today
This is a good one.
the anniversary of your father's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And I'm wondering, looking back, how you think your views align or don't align with your dad's.
My view is that the issues that I believe in, and the issues that I'm arguing about in this campaign against the war, about rebuilding the middle class, about protecting the Constitution and the First Amendment, about trying to achieve the American dream for every American, all of the issues that I feel strongly about are issues that my father also felt strongly about. I think my campaign is in many ways identical to his if you just went down the issues and checked the boxes. The same is true of President Kennedy, my uncle. So, but there may be people who disagree with me about that. And what Secretary Seward said when President Lincoln died, he said he belongs to the ages now. So I know people have different opinions about what my father and my uncle would have stood for, but I've spent a lifetime studying their records, and understanding them because it's part of my own understanding of myself. And I'm very comfortable with their values. I feel great admiration for both of them for what they tried to do for our country. And I feel like, my life has been devoted to achieving those same objectives. I have the same vision for America as they did. 55 years ago last month, I sat as a 14-year-old boy behind my father as he announced his campaign for presidency of the United States. And the day he died, he won the California primary, the most urban state in this country, and the same day the South Dakota primary, the most rural. He had succeeded in uniting America. I was with my dad when he died in Los Angeles, and we brought him back to New York, and then we brought him from Penn Station in New York to Union Station in Washington, D.C. Normally, that's a 2.5-hour train ride, but it took us 7.5 hours because there were 2 million people on the tracks. And that I will never forget as a 14-year-old boy what I saw from the windows of that train that day. In all of the urban train stations in Trenton and Newark and Philadelphia and Baltimore, they were crowded with black and white men singing the battle hymn of the Republic. My father, when he came back one time from the Delta, he said, we were all at the dinner table when he came in, and he said, I was in a tar paper shack today. I was smaller than this dining room, and there were 2 families living there, and the children get 1 meal a day. And when you get older, I want you to help those people. And when we would go into Southeast Washington or Appalachia, he would say to us, these are your people. These are Kennedy people. He said the other people, the big shots, the corporations, the millionaires don't need the Kennedys. They have lobbyists, they have PR firms, they have lawyers. And he said, these are your people, and these are the people you need to spend your life helping. And when I'm president, I'm going to be president for those people. We're going to really take back this country. You give me a piece of ground and a sword, and I am going to take back this country with your help, the help of all the homeless Republicans and Democrats and independents who are Americans first.
All right, back with Robert F.
that one
Kennedy
hits
Jr.
very
He's running for president of the
very-
United States, and there.
And just, yeah, I didn't even realize that it was the anniversary of Kennedy's dad dying. Very, very sad day for this country. And again, Kennedy has a chance here, even if it's not in 2024. 2024 may be the kickoff. This may be the prequel. You know, Hulk Hogan didn't win his first match either, but he stepped in there. And Kennedy is here to finish the job, that his uncle and his father started and continued with. And these are American values. Kennedy's book, if you have not read RFK Jr.'s 2018 or 2019 book, American Values, I just started reading that one too. And there's just so many books with this research that I'm doing. With this book that I'm writing, the research is the fun part, and the reading of the books that Kennedy wrote and the reading of the books that Trump wrote has been a lot of fun, but it's been very educational, especially when you go years of hearing all this bad stuff they said about Trump. Well, let's hear it directly from him. You go years of hearing these things that they said about Kennedy. Well, let's go directly from him. There have been many books that have been written about the Kennedy family, about the dynasty, lots of negative books. Let's hear it directly from someone who was there, named RFK Jr. And it changed my views on some things. I almost gave up on the Kennedys. I almost thought, you know what? They're just evil. They're not who I thought they were, et cetera, et cetera. Then you realize these are people just like you. They're sinners too. And if you want to get to the real story, if you want to get to everything, you got to go with the people that were there. You got to go with the Kennedys themselves. And one of the most outspoken Kennedys ever in this day and age, we're going to see, maybe even ever, is RFK Jr. An intelligent, honest, thoughtful, very humble human being, and a very wise man, whether you agree with him or not on certain things. But don't believe the hype with what they say. Just like with Trump, don't believe the hype. Get it from their own views. Like I was reading Trump's book, one of these books here. I think it was Time to Get Tough that I was reading, and it said, it gave a different perspective about the bankruptcy, because for years, one of the talking points was Trump went bankrupt. He went bankrupt. And he's like, I didn't go bankrupt. I bought these companies. We foreclosed, or they shut them down. They bankrupt the companies that he bought purposely, and then used the system to rebuild those companies. Just like anyone who has been through a bankruptcy, it'd be like somebody buying buying my debt, and I go bankrupt, but they're the owner of it. And then we come out after the bankruptcy, after all of the debt is wiped out, you get to start over, basically. That's what he is saying he was doing. So it was a different take on the bankruptcy thing that I've been hearing. They made it seem like Trump was a slumlord, and then he gives his view on these buildings and actually the builders, and just a very different take of going in and buying up these properties that were already run down. It's not like Trump ran the properties down. He went in and bought these properties that were ran down and turned them into something. He took crap and turned it into something. That's pretty much that's his version of it. Believe it or not, I'm just saying. Take it for what it's worth. I said I got goosebumps up there. So it was the same with reading RFK Jr.'s books. And it's one of the most painful things about writing this book, Kennedy and Trump, is because you have Trump going after Kennedy in certain ways. And I'm going to play this next clip here because Neil Cavuto is actually going to talk to Kennedy about this and say, hey, Trump goes after you. He throws jabs at you, and he accuses you of things, but you don't do that. And he wants to know why. And I think it's a valid question. I think it's a great question. Just do a little buffering, and I'm going to play that here next. It's a good one. About 3.5, 345.
All right, back with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's running for president of the United States. And there is another clear distinction he has with his two primary opponents in that race, Donald Trump and his legal problems. Of course, Donald Trump has now officially become a convicted felon. Many people in his camp say that's unfair. And it's very likely very soon that Hunter Biden could carry that same label. Not exactly good timing for his father around the time of the big debate that so far Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has not been invited to. Back with us. So, Robert, what do you think of that? That you're looking at a guy in Donald Trump who is running and leading in the polls as a convicted felon, doesn't seem to make a big difference to a lot of people. The same could be that Joe Biden's support doesn't wane, at least among his core group, whether his son becomes a convicted felon or not. What do you make of all of that?
Like I said earlier, Neil, I try to avoid these issues. I think it's I think one of the things that we worry about is the weaponization of the judicial system, and it seems like the Democrats feel like they don't have a candidate who can win the election, and so they have to win it in a court. And this case, I think of the three cases brought against him, was the weakest case, and appears from its history that it was earlier rejected by prosecutors, and it seemed to have been revived for political reasons. Now, let me say one thing. President Trump was doing the same thing. When President Trump was running, he was demanding that Hillary should be locked up, and he was, promising to appoint a special prosecutor. I think either side is bad. I don't think, it's like a banana republic in our country. We don't want that reputation. People are going to be derailed from seeking political office because of using the courts. And I think the DNC, by promoting these kind of cases, is really doing itself and the American public a disfavor. President Trump raised $200 million within 2 days of this because there is anxiety and outrage among the American people. And I would say this, if the Democrats won this way, they would leave half the country desperately embittered and angry. And ultimately, we're going to become ungovernable. Is this the trajectory that we want to start on? Or are we going to do what democracy says, which is even people with all their flaws and all of their warts, people ought to still be able to vote for who they want without interference from the courts.
Well, you talk about retribution and the appetite for that. Wouldn't Donald Trump have that? And maybe to hear some of the supporters, rightly so, because he has been maligned and targeted and piled on, and that if he gets back in the White House, he'll start dishing it out.
Yeah, and that's the problem with this. It's going to be tit for tat, and the Democrats now control these Democratic prosecutors are now going after President Biden. They set a terrible, terrible precedent, and you get somebody in office like President Trump who is not embarrassed about his impulse for revenge. Then you've set this terrible precedent, and our country's going down a very, very, I think, dark road if we start, conducting elections in the courts.
I know you filed this complaint with the Federal Elections Commission. What do you think is behind this decision? Do you think it's driven by the?
That's a. Let me just turn my fan off here. That's a little clip about the debates, because they're obviously trying to keep Kennedy out. They don't want him in there on June 27th or in September. There's other debates. There's all of these things. There's rules. There's FEC, Federal Election Commission rules. He has filed a complaint, so we'll see where all of this goes. If it goes anywhere, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. There is, looking at Trump's Truth Social, he spoke at the Turning Point convention today, it looks like, or it was chased the vote. It was a town hall in Phoenix, Arizona. It went about 90 minutes. I'm going to be replaying that tomorrow for anyone who, just wants to leave any comments or anything. And just, again, for my own research purposes, just like reading a book here. But this was an interesting video from Forbes Breaking News. If you haven't checked out this channel, this is a good channel, Forbes Breaking News here. Sometimes you have to weed through a lot of different things, a lot of different stuff, and the quality, you can see the highest quality is only at 480. So I usually try to take this, run it through, and make a better quality. But this is pretty interesting. I could not find this anywhere else. This is President Trump speaks at Conserve the Culture student group that is visiting Mar-a-Lago and answers reporters' questions. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. Let's take a look here. I have not seen this yet. June 5th. Okay, so this is from yesterday.
Grew up in a place just like this. Are you having a good time? How are you? Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. This is a good time. You all grew up in a place just like this, right? How are you? You were so amazing. I walk in, nobody knew I was coming, and she grabbed me and she hugged me. She said, "I like you." And she's tough too. She doesn't like a lot of people, right? But it's an honor to have you and your friends and everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you,
It's an honor
Michaela.
to be able to.
It's great. We're gonna have some good beer. We have the fake news with us tonight. We're gonna have a little good stuff to eat. Mar-a-Lago is a special place. You see that? So I just did a couple of interviews that are on tonight. Dr. Phil. I did a Dr. Phil interview. It was interesting. And so let's go and let's have something be good to eat. And we appreciate very much everybody. Thank you for coming. It's a great group of people. And I appreciated you very much. That was something when we walked in.
Probably be crying.
No, it was beautiful. That was from the heart too.
Yes.
And I think to a large extent because of what we've done with the colleges, black colleges and universities, I got them funded. When I was president, I got to know the heads of many of the black colleges and universities because they'd come, and after 2 years I said, "Why do you keep coming back?" He said, "Well, we feel like beggars because they never extend it. They give it 1 year, and then we have to come back the next." I said, "You shouldn't have to do that." And these are great people. The job they do is incredible. And I got them long-term financing, more money than they ever thought possible, more than they wanted. And they're doing a great job. I said, "The only bad part is I'll never see you again, probably." That's the bad thing. They said, "We don't like that either." But I got them taken care of, and Michaela knew that. And she came up to me, she said, "Thank you." So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Let's see. Thank you, everybody.
Mr. President, after your verdict, have you lost confidence in your legal team? Have you lost confidence in your legal team after the verdict?
No. It's a rigged system, and it's a terrible system, actually, but it's a rigged system. And I think we're doing very well. We had a big thing happen in Georgia today. You saw that. And step by step, this is a rigged situation. This is a situation where they go after a political opponent. And it all takes place from the White House and from the DOJ, including the state and city cases. And if I wasn't running, there would be nothing. And we're leading Biden by a lot. He's the worst president in the history of our country. And we're leading him by a lot. And we have to beat him because otherwise we're not going to have a country left. So.
In your New York trial, you said you won.
How can you do it against the coordinated warfare against the rogue party?
Well, they have to fight it. They have to fight it. And it's a very dangerous thing because if the Republicans go after the Democrats the same way, that's all we're going to be doing in our country. It's a very dangerous thing, but you can't weaponize the DOJ. And you look at the DOJ. The DOJ ran this thing, the local. You call it a city or a state, but the DOJ ran it. And it's a very bad thing. It's a very dangerous moment, really a dangerous moment for our country. Can't let it happen.
In your New York case, you said you want to see the Supreme Court intervene. How and when exactly do you want to see
Well, we'll see what happens. This is a unique case because they've interfered with the Republican nominee for president of the United States. There's never been anything like that before. And in this case, it was a judge who was appointed. He didn't even get elected. He's appointed. And you take a look at the conflict. Now I'm gagged. I have a gag order. Can you believe it? I'm the Republican nominee. I'm leading Biden by a lot. And I will say we had the biggest fundraising in the history of politics over the last week. There's never been anything like it. And that in a certain way is like a poll, I would say, right? It's a big poll, but it's been, I think, the biggest fundraising ever, because the people know it's wrong what's happening. You can't do that to a country. And you can't gag a nominee. Can you imagine you're running for office and you're gagged, you're not allowed to talk? When that happens, we are no longer a democracy, and we're not going to let that happen. And I know a lot of Republicans want retribution. They want to do that. We're going to see what happens. Hopefully everything works out, but you can't do it. You can't have a local judge tell a Republican nominee that he can't talk about things, because there's a lot of things that we can talk about. They're very easy questions to talk about. You can't let this happen to our country. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, press. Thank you, press. Do you regret testifying, Mr. President? Do you regret? Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Thank you,
Set a
sir.
record. I think they set a record in the first few days.
David, you want me to go right now?
Thank you very much.
Do you regret testifying, Mr. President? Do you regret testifying, not testifying in your case?
I would have loved to have testified, but it was a very unfair trial. Everybody advised, don't do it. It's a very unfair.
I see why the clip is so short.
Thank you. Thank you.
I see got the question. I see why the clip was so short there. And then there they go, walking out. Pretty cool. Thank you, Forbes Breaking News. They always have some interesting stuff. A lot of stuff, like I said, sometimes you have to weed through, but sometimes they have some clips like that you're not going to find anywhere else. So that's amazing. Then, should we get to the Trump, or should we play? There is another Rand Paul one. There is another Rand Paul one from.
Have you heard of this brand new product that instantly cleans toilets without any scrubbing?
I like
Take
Rand
any
Paul.
dirty toilet, pour.
No, I know I was kind of upset with Rand Paul a little bit when he's running as a Republican, and his dad was kind of went back to the Libertarian Party. By the way, the Ron Paul speech from the Libertarian Party National Convention is really good too. If you haven't seen that, it's definitely worth watching. It's kind of short, 20 minutes. That Libertarian convention was just a cluster, but there's just some good stuff here. Let me see if this is the highest quality. And I got to sit through some of Loudmouth Hannity to get to the man, Rand Paul.
It's one of Senator Rand Paul's legendary exchanges with Dr. Fauci. Let's go down memory lane. You might remember this.
Let's do it.
The point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator.
All right, here now with reaction, he is the author of Deception, the great COVID cover-up. That is Senator Rand Paul, great state of Kentucky. Now, in the early months of the pandemic, Senator Fauci expressed he wasn't convinced the COVID-19 virus was spread as a result of a lab link. Now, in the earliest months in January, aren't there emails that you've written about, talked about, that show just the opposite, that they were in a panic, that number one, they may have funded it. Number two, they knew gain of function research took place and coronavirus research took place, and that they may have funded it?
Yeah, one of the very frightened emails he gets from an assistant in January of 2020 is an assistant saying, "Oh my goodness, this is gain of function research we funded." This is from his assistant. This is gain of function research that we funded, but I don't know how that could have happened because it never went before the safety committee. So yes, they knew very, very quickly, and they were worried about guilt. They were worried about culpability. They're worried that anybody's hands that touched the money, anybody who approved the money going to Wuhan would ultimately get blamed. So Fauci actually organized a paper called Proximal Origins. He had 5 virologists write the paper. Most of them were well rewarded with large grants. Christian Anderson got a $9 million grant about a month after this. Meanwhile, all of these people were privately saying, oh my goodness, it looks like it was manipulated. But publicly, they were saying it's a conspiracy theory. They went to Facebook, they suppressed it. They told Facebook, suppress the story of anything coming from the lab. It's all conspiracy theory. So in no way was Fauci ever objective. Fauci leaned in on this. He pressed hard, and he used his 40 years worth of accumulated power to try to suppress any story that this came from the lab.
And anybody that disagreed was labeled a conspiracy theorist. But how soon into the pandemic do you believe Dr. Fauci knew that, in fact, it was gain of function, it happened in the Wuhan lab, and it happened with American taxpayer dollars? What do the emails show you?
January 27th, there's emails starting at 6 o'clock. They're going across the ocean to Jeremy Farrar in England and back. They go on till 3 in the morning. At 3 in the morning, Anthony Fauci sends an email to the head of the safety committee. The head of the safety committee should have seen this research, but never did. And he sends him an email saying, hey, nothing to see here. Here's a paper that says in all likelihood this came from animals, not from the lab. Why is he sending that to the head of the safety committee? Because the safety committee was never allowed to review this. For 3 years, I've been asking the NIH for the deliberations. If this is not gain of function, I want to see the discussion between the scientists. Fauci says all the scientists up and down, they all said it wasn't gain of function. Let me see the deliberations. I want to see the arguments for and against. They won't reveal this. They are tighter lipped than the CIA on this. And the NIA has resisted really requests from Democrats and Republicans. The Democrat chair of my committee has co-signed this request. It's over a year old, and my individual requests are 3 years old. They have resisted, they have obscured, and according to Fauci's assistant that he threw under the bus today, David Morenz, according to him, it was a targeted cover-up and that they destroyed emails and evidence. But today, the most shocking and surprising thing was Anthony Fauci threw David Morenz, a 20-year assistant, under the bus and acted as if he'd hardly ever met him. He wasn't part of the inner circle. He never made decisions, had no access to my office, all completely the opposite of what David Morenz says.
Is this the same assistant that sent that email? Oh my God, this is gain of function.
Different assistant, but David Morenz worked for 20 years for Anthony Fauci. He's called the special advisor to the head of the agency, which Anthony Fauci is. But today, Anthony Fauci could not run fast enough. And the real question is this: if we were to get a prosecutor someday, maybe a new presidential administration, that asks David Morenz under oath and says, you're going to be punished for destroying records, you may see prison time, would you be willing to give us the full story on what Anthony Fauci knew and when he knew it? I think there's a great deal to be had. But I think one of the reasons Morenz is the fall guy here, and they've chosen him as the fall guy, he's been paid for over a year not to work. So he's on paid leave for over a year, maybe 2 years now from the NIH. They've never made decisions on him.
Well, let me ask you this. The NIH recently finally admitted taxpayers funded gain of function. Okay. Now we're learning that NIH scientists received $710 million in royalties from drug makers of the during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's just breaking, Senator. What should the American people know about that?
I think when you have a drug company that makes a vaccine like Moderna, and I know of at least one payment of $450 million in sharing the proceeds of the vaccine, you have to wonder how anybody at the NIH could be objective. So if Moderna has a new drug, how can they be objective when they've just received $450 million from the company? So it really is a situation. It's a revolving door between big pharma and the government. Somebody's got to put an end to it. And I hope the next president will.
Deception, the great COVID cover-up. You were way ahead of the curve, Senator. I wish more people had listened to you about this, the origins of COVID, NIH spending, also something called natural immunity. Nobody wanted to listen to you, but you were right. Senator, thank you. Hey, Sean Hannity here.
Good
Hey,
stuff
click
there.
here to subscribe to Fox
Okay.
News YouTube page.
That was a good one. This is still one. This is my favorite still. I'll never get tired of this. Let's see.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China. I want to be accurate. Yeah,
I love it.
please.
Are you
I have great love for all of the people from our country. But as you know, China tried to say at one point, maybe they stopped now, that it was caused by American soldiers. That can't happen. It's not going to happen. Not as long as I'm president. It comes from China.
That was good because it comes from China. I don't know what was the date on that. March 18th, 2020. Yeah, so that's pretty early on. That's a good one. I gotta go and grab that clip later on. That was a pretty good pretty good clip there, I think. I don't know if I have any more. I was thinking about a little bit of the Dr. Phil, but you know, it is a little bit past my bedtime. Maybe I'll play 1 or 2 minutes of the Dr. Phil interview. I'm a little worried it's going to get banned. I think I'll save that. I think I will save that for next time. But all right, with that, my friends, God bless you all. Thank you. And until next time, remember, Jesus Christ loves you. And so do I. We got a long way to go here. We are heading into November. But before that, coming up next is the first debate. And the big question is, will they allow Kennedy to be a part of it? It sounds like no. Their loss, not his. God bless you all.